Good morning and good afternoon.
Morning from Southern Africa. How are you, Joe?
I'm fine. How are you too?
We are doing great here.
Good. So I think we can start and others can catch up as we go along. Yes, we have about 1 hour and 20 minutes discussion around the COVID-19 and its impact to the Eastern and Southern Africa, particularly for smallholder farmers. We wanted this to focus on Southern Africa, but we had similar, which Chair Hakim Baliraine from Uganda will be talking about. And then we'll have the response on the SADC that will be presented by Honorable Matthias Kasamba, the Chair of Agriculture and Natural Resources Committee of the East African Parliamentary Forum. And then we're gonna have a couple of the so-called rapid fire presentations. This is about 3 to 4 minutes each, and we expect about 2-3 slides pointing on key issues so that we can follow. And then the first one to respond with the rapid fire presentation will be Clement Kalonga. This is from SADC. He had confirmed area, but up to now we have been waiting to see if we'll join. I'm losing my, someone is, yes, thank you. And then we'll have SADC CNGO Director, Mr. Glenn Faret, sorry, who will be talking about the ability to respond collectively on disaster like COVID-19 for the SADC. And then you'll have an intervention from OXFAM on their response as far as challenges and opportunity brought by the COVID. Focusing, and then we'll have Madam Pofu speaking from Zimbabwe, the experience of Zimbabwe, and then we'll have Madam Beatrice Makwenda from Malawi, and then we'll have gender-related impacts from Dr. Betuli from SAT, and then we'll have Madam Piri from SAT speaking about philanthropists' response to COVID-19. And then we'll have the Q&A. Please, if we have questions, you can put on the Q&A, and later on, Mr. Adem will pick them, and then we can respond. So we have at the end closing remarks from Mr. Alvin Munyasia from OXFAM. So ladies and gentlemen, welcome again. So I'll start with talking a little bit about the pandemic. I'm waiting for my slides. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Mushi. So that is the lineup as far as the presentation will go on. As we can see, and let me say that is organized together with OXFAM Pan-Africa. So we are grateful to have OXFAM Pan-Africa. So as I said before, we are going to talk about the COVID-19, and this is the follow-up after the one in EAC that was organized by SAF Uganda. And this is just organized after the second Malabo Biennial Review Report that was released in February 2020. So from there, because most of the countries in Southern Africa are off track to achieve the Malabo Declaration. Those are 7 commitments which head of states and government committed to. So we can see the importance now talking about also in terms of the Malabo Biennial Review reports. So we have challenged, as many countries in Southern Africa are on track. We have huge malnutrition. And the report, like the FAO reports, alluded to COVID-19, saying that this is a crisis on the crisis. We have hunger and malnutrition. It means that our body are not very resilient, and still COVID-19 is coming. So the objective of the event is threefold: to share experience and challenges, and number two, to see how we can develop policy positions to different platforms on regional level, and then plan our internal response as individual organizations. So from these notes, let me now, can we move to the following slide? Yeah, we will skip the update as far as COVID-19, but up to yesterday, we had about 21,000 cases and death around 1,000 and recovery about 5,250, whereby the Northern Africa and Southern African are leading. Let's continue. Those are the panelists. Mr. Grenfared from SADC CNGO. We have Mr. Duashe Chirigo from OXFAM. Mpofu, Madam Beatrice, and then Madam or Dr. Nyamambi, and then we have Piri from SAT. So over to you, Chair Hakim Bariraine from Uganda, but he's the chair of the SAF forum as well. You're welcome, Mr. Hakim.
Yeah, thank you very much. The regional coordinator of SAF, and welcome everyone to this webinar on the 21st of April 2020. Justin, can you send my, yes, send my share. I'm not seeing it.
Next slide, please.
I'm not seeing it. Yes. Before I start, I'll appreciate for everyone who has put time aside. But still, amongst the participants, Hakim Bariraine, as already the coordinator has said, I'm the chairperson of Eastern Southern Africa Small Scale Farmers Forum in the 60 countries, and I'm also the chairperson of SAF Uganda. But I'm the representative of PCFS Africa, People's Coalition on Food Sovereignty of Africa, to the Global Security, the Global Executive Committee. Our headquarters are based in Manila. And online, amongst the participants, we have the co-chair of the Global PCFS, Sylvia. She's already online, so welcome them to be part of this forum. Back to everyone is welcome, and we appreciate for the time you've spared so that we can have a moment of cogitation on issues which are affecting small-scale farmers in Eastern Southern Africa, but basically in the SADC region. Eastern Southern Africa Small-Scale Farmers Forum is, in short, SAF, is a movement initiated, led, and owned by small-scale farmers in Eastern Southern Africa. The purpose of its formation was to enable small-scale farmers in the Eastern Southern Africa to be able to have a united voice so that our issues, concerns, and recommendations become an integral part of the policies. SAF was formed 17 years ago in Southern Africa in 2002 during the World Sustainable Summit development. We are currently in 16 countries, of which 6 are from East Africa and 11 from the Southern. Our headquarters in the Republic of Tanzania, Morogoro City, which shares both the East African community and SADC. You know, Tanzania is both in East Africa and in the Southern, in the SADC, South African Development Community. This webinar has been organized jointly by SAF Regional and OXFAM Pan-Africa for countries in SADC after a successful one in East African Community, which was held on 8th of April 2020, hosted by SAF Uganda. Small-scale farmers comprises the majority of the population, around 60 to 70%, and contributing the GDP above 25% on average. And we are the main food producers with a few large-scale farmers in Southern Africa and some parts of Botswana and Zambia. Next slide. Next slide, please. Based on the deliberations in the previous webinar in East African, we learned that it is necessary for East African partner states and small-scale farmers to, one, at farmer level, to continue standing in solidarity with small-scale farmers in the East African community and beyond. This includes standing for farmers' rights to protect resources and against exploitation. To ensure the rights and security of women farmers with their produce, especially in rural areas. Women farmers are majority farmers and who most at risk. Improve access to COVID-19 information to small-scale farmers to keep us updated on the status and situation that affect us. Improving storage can help reduce post-harvest crop losses along the disrupted supply chain. As farmers, we are exploiting the utilization of online markets and bulk markets by selling and transporting together in cooperatives to avoid being exploited during this situation. Ensure safety to small-scale farmers as essential service providers with resources like hygiene kits, cleaning of infrastructure, etc., and measures to prevent COVID-19 contamination. At the East African community and partner states level, we called for farmers as other businesses should be considered for compensation and access to favorable cheap credit and loans to help continue operation during and after the COVID-19. On this, and in addition to this one, I think apart from being compensated, we should also be rewarded, like recognition during the national events, given medals, because we've been there all the times. But you find that medals are given those who go to wars, who go to fight, who go to do things like, anyway, who fought for independence. But we also people who need medals, be recognized and also awarded medals. The East African Committee and partner states should strategically aim to support farmers' produce locally. All imported crops like rice from Pakistan, Vietnam, fish from China, wheat from Russia and France, to shave foreign exchange and enhance food sovereignty. East African Community government should ensure the budget allocation to the agriculture sector in 2020-2021 amid COVID-19 reflect the commitments in the Malabo Declaration by progressively investing at least 10% to ensure quality food supply and raw materials. Next. We also ask Yala to transmit to the East African Community Head of State Summit our 1 million farmer petition to energize the East African Community partner states to fulfill all of the 7 Malabo goals by 2025. Establish and strengthen the East African Community Reserve Fund to be used during the emergencies and the disasters. You know, it is very sad to find that in East Africa, every partner state is implementing its own Malabo, its own COVID strategies. By now, the solidarity which has been existing in the East African community would be shown at this time when there are issues like this one of COVID, but you find that everyone is doing their own thing. So the solidarity is not visible at this moment. Support the promotion of agroecology in the East African community, which is proven to providing nutritious food, resilient to climate change and pandemic like COVID-19 by producing food that enhance immune system of people. And we also ask East African community and partner states to take the deliberate efforts to demonstrate the African Union decision passed by the heads of state and the government on ecological organic agriculture initiative of 2011 to support organic agriculture and adoption of climate resilient sustainable agriculture practice in the East African community. Next. Next. What's wrong with your computer? I thank you all for the attention, and simply the East African Community, Yala Agriculture Committee Chairperson is here. I wish to hear from some of the responses on the issues we raised in the previous webinar. I beg to submit and wish everyone good deliberations and also to hear from you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Hakim. And the next one online, I think is Honorable Honorable Kasamba. So can we? Hello. Do you have Honorable Kasamba online?
I don't see him. I don't see him yet. He's not. Abbas Mutumba is here.
Abbas, can you take the presentation by the Honorable Mr. Mutumba?
Please move him from the attendees.
Mr. Mutumba? Oh, he might be joining. So can we?
I think his microphone is still on mute.
Abbas, Justin Omush, can you unmute the microphone for Mr. Abbas?
Yeah,
yes,
there he is.
Yes, comrade, you are now on the show.
Yeah, just a second, Mr. Joe.
Good.
So
hello, Mr. Joy Finger.
Hello? Mr. Joe.
Yes, Honorable.
Can you hear the voice of Honorable Kasamba? He did not join directly because there was a technical problem.
Yes. Where is he calling?
He was trying to call you.
We are hearing him.
Okay. So,
yes.
Honorable, you can go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Joy. And I will take this opportunity to thank all the listeners on the webinar presentation. I am Kasamba Matias, the Member of Parliament, East African Legislative Assembly. I also happen to chair the Committee of Agriculture, Tourism and Natural Resources. I am very happy to be part of the webinar presentation assessing the impact of COVID-19 to small-scale farming and food security and sovereignty. As East African partner states and as a member of the East African Legislative Assembly, I will take this opportunity to thank the ESAF, the Eastern and Southern African Small-Scale Farmers as a forum, for having been in partnership with the East African Community member states to champion bigger voice as far as improving the plight of the smallholder farmers is concerned. The EAC is one of the biggest and oldest regional integration in Africa. It has 6 partner states, that is Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, South Sudan, Tanzania.
Next slide, please.
Hello? And
yes, continue. Go on.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah, so we are trying to see how the Secretariat, which is based in Arusha, together with the Parliament of East Africa, work very closely with the over 177 million people, almost now 190 million people in the region. And you well know that the only business that every human being on this globe must undertake 3 times the minimum a day is having a meal 3 times a day. So the smallholder farmers forum in this region contribute a monthly in as far as making food on the table for the East African community members and through the East African and Southern African Farmers Forum, we are able to champion voices of the smallholder farmers who till the land, who lack the implements, who lack the breeding materials, who lack the fertilizers, who lack the means to generate increased productivity and improve the production levels of food. It is in the East African community partner states that where the small-scale farmers improvement. Because when you look at the Marabo declaration, it is only Rwanda which has hit it was the best in as far as the ranking is concerned. All the other partner states are still off the target and as far as realizing the Marabo declaration and the CADAP requirement in as far as food production is concerned. So we would like to see that during this pandemic, the situation is getting out of hand because the markets are more or less closed. The transport systems in the various partner states is limited, and the level of interaction as far as the human beings are concerned is being given the social distance. So equally, the social distancing to avoid the coronavirus is greatly impacting in as far as the farmers, the small-scale farmers, are able to reach the market, are able to reach the supplies of inputs in as far as the seedlings, breeding materials, and as far as supplying, accessing technology like irrigation technology, mechanization technology, because there is no longer free interaction, free movement of goods. There is always limited. More so, when it comes to cross-border trade, it is even becoming much more difficult because different partner states are putting up different measures to limit the free interaction of the market people across the borders, and even the truck drivers are getting limited every day to ensure that we minimize the spread of the pandemic. But this should be an opportunity for us as the SAF members and all those champions for the small-scale farmers to make sure that it is a lesson to learn for those who have been investing heavily in the hardcore infrastructure development without looking at how to create a stronger bondage between the farmers and the markets and the processing facilities to ensure that there is increased food production in the region. It's very unfortunate that currently we import food almost worth over $3 billion as the six partner states of East Africa in terms of wheat, in terms of rice, in terms of maize, cooking oil, at times even sugar, the industrial sugar, which comes from far away, whereas we have all the potential to have these produced within the region. So this should be an opportunity as partner states that food is the first medicine. And I'm proudly been championing that if you eat food as medicine, you don't need to eat medicine as food. So if you fail to eat food as medicine, you end up having medicine as your food. So this is the challenge. The immunity system of every human being in this world is made by the daily rations of balanced diet, the energy improvement foods, the nutritious food substances, which improve the quality of the livelihood and minimizing the vulnerability of the population who are getting infected by the coronavirus. So it is an opportunity for us as the leaders in the region to champion very hard, to increase on our voice in as far as the demand for improved budget allocation, the demand for parliamentarian championship, and I'm glad through the FAO arrangement, we are trying to establish the Parliamentarian Alliance on Food and Nutrition Security in the region to make sure that the discussions which are on table in the national parliament becomes centrally focused in as far as demanding improved attention in as far as food production is concerned. After all, most of the MPs in the region or globally are voted by the very smallholder farmers who give them the votes to go and defend the budget allocation at the national capitals. So, coronavirus is a challenge. It is a global challenge, but it should be a wake-up call for us as leaders to champion planting of nutritious vegetables, planting of championing of value addition of these foods, so that we have longer life values on these products to ensure that our people are able to improve not only in the nutrition they eat on the table, but also to earn income. The world is demanding more food than ever, and so this is an opportunity as we look at the post-COVID impact assessment. We must look at how do we make sure that the smallholder farmers become the center stage, because right unfortunately now we are trying to save humanity by having them minimizing infection. But food is the best medicine in as far as eliminating COVID in our region.
Hello, Mr. Joe.
I want to thank SAF and all the partners and those who are involved in the discussion to ensure that we continue this deliberation in as far as making sure that the attention of the regional SADC and the EAC becomes a major center stage for feeding the world and also feeding the region.
Hello. Yeah, gonna go mamu katono nyo bana komawo tugenda ku. Mr. Joe. Hello.
Yes.
Hello.
Thank you, Mr. Bass and Mr. Honorable Kasamba. Joe is coming on.
Okay.
Justin, can you remove that one, the next thing, because I'm not seeing Joe.
Yeah, Honorable, just hold on a bit as the moderator comes online, but the show is still on.
Yeah. Maybe there are some network.
Network issues.
Mr. Joe has a problem with his network. I think you can proceed with co-hosting.
Yes, I'm here waiting for Justin. Justin, can you please move to the next speaker? I'll remove that one, go to the next speaker. Justin, if you are hearing.
Okay.
Yes. Joe is back.
Joe is back. Is Joe back?
He has a problem with his network.
Yeah,
okay.
I
think we can proceed.
But you know, we have to let Honorable Kasamba go because he's joining the task force briefly also. We're meeting with the Prime Minister in about 15 minutes.
It is fine. It's fine.
And so if we can let him go, Mr. Akim Balila, you can give him a message so he can go in peace.
It is fine. It's fine. We shall let him know.
Okay. So, Mr. Hakim, can Honorable Kasamba leave? You give him the message.
Okay.
Okay. Salongo, mano baleke bana yera bakomyonga bana chibetaga tujja kukitegera ngenda bagoberera mpaka.
Mr. Alvin, you can take over because we said moderation will be between Mr. Alvin. Mr. Alvin, are you there? Mr. Alvin, can you take the moderation, please?
Thank you so much, Akim. And thank you for the presentation that has come up from the EAC. And indeed, those are really pertinent issues that have come up. And we were also just reflecting on the same. As we move ahead, could we move to our next presenter, please? Justin, who is Mr. Glenn Farid, the Executive Director from SADC NGO. Please, Abbas, mute your microphone. Mr. Glenn Farid is the SADC NGO Executive Director, and will be taking us through the impact of COVID-19 on small-scale farming, food security, and sovereignty in Southern Africa. Mr. Glenn, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Abbas. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Glenn. Please.
Thank you, Alvin. To our organizers, I'd like to firstly, of course, extend the thanks for bringing us together on this critical topic at this critical time. I'm not going to repeat what I think has been set out as the key elements of the context within which we are responding to the impact of COVID-19. But to briefly introduce the SADC Council of NGOs, it is a regional body which has a memorandum of understanding with the SADC Secretariat, and it represents the interests of non-governmental organizations in the 16 member states of SADC. It is headquartered in Botswana, and it organizes in the region alongside the Southern Africa Trade Union Coordinating Council and the Fellowship of Christian Councils in Southern Africa as apex bodies. And we work closely and in collaboration with all regional bodies such as ISAF. Greetings to all of you wherever you are. I hope that this finds you well. In our terms of reference, we were limited to 2 slides. I went to 3, but I hope that you will find the information useful. So I think the starting point that we need to have is that SADC as an intergovernmental body is established by treaty. And as you can see here, under the first objects of the treaty, one of them relates to combating HIV or other communicable diseases. And clearly COVID-19 or the coronavirus falls under that description. Now, how has SADC responded? Firstly, there have been meetings of the health ministers which have outlined regional guidelines for the facilitation, harmonizing and facilitating the movement of critical goods and services across the region during the COVID-19 period. We can share that link. Sorry, it's not hyperlinked into the slide, but you can go and have a look at that elsewhere. And that is essentially attempting to make sure that cross-border trade continues across all the countries within SADC. So that's one of the key things that have been done. Secondly, there's the regional measures, which are summarized in the slide, and I will take you through them very briefly, if you don't mind. So what this is an attempt to make sure that SADC as a region has put in place certain measures. So member states have agreed to establish national emergency operations centers, and that is linked to a national emergency trust funds and national resource mobilization strategies. There's the suspension, as you are all aware, of regional face-to-face meetings, and instead utilizing the video conferencing such as we are doing today. There is the re-establishment and expansion of the technical committee for coordinating and monitoring the SADC protocol on health. There is the mobilization of support, number 4, towards containment of the COVID-19 pandemic and mitigation of its socioeconomic impact on the SADC region. The Regional Resource Mobilization Initiative builds on national initiatives by individual member states to respond to COVID-19 from the short to the long term. Then there's the pooled procurement services for pharmaceuticals and medical supplies. So this is attempting to have member states utilize the facility for the procurement of the needed supplies for the prevention, treatment, and control of COVID-19 and any other epidemics. The adoption, as I've just spoken to, which has now been formalized and has been released by SADC, of the harmonization and facilitation of cross-border transport operations during the pandemic. The partnership with the UNESCO to support SADC members in mitigating the effects of corona on education and ensuring continuity of education. And this is going to be led by the SADC Secretariat. And the introduction of a SADC regional status report on COVID-19, which will be shared with member states on a weekly basis with recommendations for consideration by member states. Monitoring and analyzing the socioeconomic impact of COVID-19 on SADC economies. The macroeconomic subcommittee of SADC is tasked with coordination within the SADC Secretariat, and it will be analyzing and monitoring the impact on the economy and providing policy recommendations to member states. Lastly, there will be updates on COVID-19 shared on the SADC website. I think at a glance, you can recognize that there are a number of problems and contradictions with these coordinated regional activities. Firstly, I want us to start with what is most important. Since 2005, member states in Eastern and Southern Africa have signed up to the WHO regulations. Over that period, according to a recent study released by Equinet, which is a health experts network in Southern Africa, you will be able to see that there has been significant disinvestment in public health. I think it's quite important to appreciate this point. So the pandemic is finding our health systems seriously under-resourced and unequipped and ill-equipped to deal with the public health outbreak that we are now experiencing. And this is despite existing commitments that member states have made in terms of the WHO regulations. Moreover, with respect to small-scale farming, despite progress that has been made in the implementation of the Malabo Declaration commitments and the regional agricultural policy of SADC, we know that the entirety of the ecosystem necessary for small-scale farming, for access to markets and produce to markets have not been undertaken. And I think this has found our sector particularly vulnerable at this time, in consequence also to the seasonality of food production and the numbers that we are talking about. I think it would be very important for us out of this webinar to identify a clear pathway to quantify the impact of COVID-19 on small-scale agricultural production in Eastern and Southern Africa. I think that having the empirical evidence to assist governments and member states and the regional body at SADC to understand how to respond is going to be quite important. This is a matter of life and death. And without the best estimate that we can produce, it is very likely that the resources dedicated to responding to COVID-19 may well be misdirected, or that coordination amongst member states will fall short of meeting food security needs for the peoples of Eastern and Southern Africa. I want to return now to this coordination plan, if I may, Chair. You will note that the coordination plan follows largely one of the major fault lines within the Southern African development community. And that is the prioritization of member state sovereignty, so-called sovereignty. We have different member states behaving differently at different times. We have some going into lockdown without any regard for the impact on the neighboring countries. We have a complete lack of coordination from SADC, despite the rhetoric coming out of the Secretariat. We can see no effort at harmonization beyond the cross-border trade facilitation, which we've shared. This means that the efforts that have been outlined in the coordination, the 10-point plan for regional actions, in fact, there is no evidence of this occurring at all, which means that member states continue to do as they please. We have Zambia in a partial lockdown. I understand in the United Republic of Tanzania, there are different measures. We have Malawi, which is now opened up again after attempting a lockdown We have the politicization of the lockdown in the Kingdom of Lesotho, and so on and so on. So all our member states have a lack of shared actions amongst them. So it means that as the virus moves and as its impact becomes felt, we are not in effect working collectively to put in place what is necessary. So this is a major concern, and it's going to impact all of us. So
thank you. And you have 2 more minutes, Glenn.
Oh, I've got 2 more minutes. I was going to take 20 seconds. Okay. Thanks. So at this time, we are not only dealing with the virus as a virus, that is the public health dimension. As Joe said in his introduction, the virus is finding us in a number of interrelated crises of a socio-economic nature. So food security is going to be absolutely critical for us moving forward. How do we then take the opportunities? I wish to place before you some key actions that I think are necessary. It is absolutely vital that ISAF and its partners are able to dialogue directly with the structures that SADC have set up. And I think that our role as the SADC Council of NGOs is to facilitate that interaction. As you can see, there's a macroeconomic subcommittee which has been established, and we believe that it is necessary for clear proposals to be made in respect of food security from small-scale farmers at this time. I think, secondly, it is necessary for us to undertake a rapid assessment of the various impacts on our constituency in respect of food security to inform proposals that can be taken up at a SADC level. And I do also believe that that information needs to be shared at an African Union level. So I think our job at this point is to put pressure based on the evidence that we have and to make proposals within the frameworks of SADC to assist the coordination. But I think all of us need to pressurize our governments and SADC and the African Union to be far more transparent and accessible at this time of crisis. We believe that this crisis, while it is deadly, is a fundamental opportunity to reconfigure how regional and continental integration takes place. And again, it reaffirms the necessity to put people first. And there is no putting people first without ensuring their health and well-being. And critical to our livelihoods is the small-scale farmer community in Eastern and Southern Africa. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenn, for that very brilliant and comprehensive presentation that looked really at the challenges faced by the SADC region, especially in the failure in investing in agriculture set out in the regional agricultural plans within the Malabo Declaration to cater for resilience, and the challenges around coordination among member states in responding to the crisis, and primarily on logistical issues and transport to enhance and ease cross-border trade. And your observations and actions in civil society organizations to directly have a dialogue with the SADC with a clear proposal on a quantified impact on food security by the pandemic, as well as calling for accountability and transparency in resources invested in responding to the immediate needs of small-scale farmers within the economic stimulus programs. Thank you so much, and that must have been captured well with Andrew as our rapporteur, and we think that that is something that we are willing together as partners and other civil society organizations in the continent to work with you to push these recommendations to the SADC and to the Africa Union. With that, we move to our next presenter, Justin.
Yes, this is Mr. Kidwa Shechirigo.
Kuda,
OXFAM.
yeah. welcome Kuda from OXFAM, who will be sharing with us the state of food security in SAF and what OXFAM is doing in response to the pandemic and in supporting communities and especially women small-scale farmers. Welcome, Kuda.
Thank you very much, Alvin. I will also want to extend my thanks to the guys who have just presented before me, and as well as to the organizers of this webinar. It has been quite useful, and I'm actually learning a lot of things across the continent. Without further ado, I would want to repeat a lot of things that have been mentioned, especially from the Eastern African side, but basically a number of responses in terms of with regard to OXFAM, they are quite in line with what our colleagues in East Africa are actually doing. But I'm going to focus on three major key responses that OXFAM is taking ahead with. So in brief, I'm just going to mention them, then I'll expound a little bit because of my time, because we were given some time limitations. So we are looking at, from the OXFAM side, we are looking at program interventions in terms of responses to COVID. We're also looking at resource mobilization. But let me also mention that we previously, or maybe generally, we know that as NGOs, we normally look beyond the African continent, or we normally look to the Western African countries in terms of resource mobilization whenever we have a pandemic. But now this COVID, I think it's a lesson, it's a call to us all to look internally, because like we know that COVID, the most affected countries are actually in the West. So that basically means they're not going to have a lot of resources to direct to Africa, in as much as we're actually looking up to them. Then the third response that we are looking at is the rapid analysis to guide our policy advocacy, as well as our lobbying for national governments to redirect its resources or their resources to most vulnerable communities in the face of COVID. So maybe can we go to the next slide so that I can then expand on these three key interventions. The first one, like I mentioned earlier on, is program interventions. OXFAM is already helping people to minimize the risk of infection by providing accurate information and advice in local languages. To this end, just to give you an example, in Zim, we have already started sharing some jingles or some information in local languages based on the number of the number of language or different language that we have here in Zimbabwe. And equally, resources permitting, we are also going to replicate that approach to other countries in southern Africa, to say, in as much as we know that maybe English is the major language, or maybe the communication language, but we understand most of our vulnerable communities may not read things in English. So we are providing this information in local languages. And this is done through various media platforms. Like I've mentioned earlier on, we have national radio stations, engagement in national response meetings, as well as electronic platforms. That to mean our Facebook, our Twitter accounts, and everything else. They're actually sharing information. And maybe let me also mention to this, the information that we are sharing is actually verified information. When we are working with Ministry of Health or maybe Department of Health in each of these countries, so that our information is actually in line with what the government is also sharing out to the public. So we're not sharing different information with what the Ministry of Health or the Department of Health are sharing. We're also engaging our smallholder farmers. In particular, we have a bias towards women because of they're actually mostly marginalized. They're actually the ones who are hard hit whenever we are having a pandemic. So we are also engaging our smallholder women farmers to get some human stories around challenges brought about by COVID. And OXFAM teams are increasing the delivery of soap, sanitation services, including hand washing facilities and clean water, especially to the densely populated urban areas, so that they at least get clean water for wash services, as COVID really calls for wash. The next slide. This is just a graphic presentation on what we have actually been doing. I think the best you can actually see for yourself. We are delivering this a tanker delivering water to some populated areas, and also that's basically promoting wash, like I've mentioned earlier on. So let's move on to the next slide.
Could you have 2 minutes for your
2 minutes? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. I'm sure I'll be done by that. By 2 minutes. The next response that we are actually taking serious is resource mobilization for COVID-19. So to this effect, we've actually mobilized. We've actually come together as office staff to put up some concept note that we're actually sharing beyond within internally countries, so that even our private sector company can also possibly fund our responses to COVID, and as well as we're actually sharing this concept note beyond Southern Africa. Key actions are planned around this concept note is awareness raising, support towards rolling out these activities based on the results that we're actually getting. Then the next slide. All right, next slide, please. All right. So our key, the next slide, our key intervention is rapid analysis and advocacy. We're actually gathering evidence, and we're also putting up a briefing paper highlighting the impacts of COVID, focusing on food security, nutrition, food systems, and market systems. But let me quickly have a rundown of the key policy or the key recommendation that we have. In a minute, I'll be done. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes. So our key recommendation is OXFAM SAF is that national governments should take steps to ensure that the rural women, youth and men continue to produce food, accessing both input and output markets to cushion the foreseen regional trade deficit and supply. This will prevent them from falling deeper into poverty during this challenging time. We're also advocating, recommending that there is increase in sanitation, and strengthening of provision of masks, whatever, and sanitizers at informal markets in which women participate and are densely populated. Then another key recommendation is that we lobby for our government to provide regulated prices of essential commodities, because some suppliers and retailers may actually take advantage of this constrained supply. Then the next slide, which is actually my last one. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Hello. Next slide. Most of countries acknowledge the necessity of allowing food production to continue and the importance of trade in both grain and ancillary materials such as packaging in the manufacture of food. So we suggest that national governments also support the agricultural sector more than before, using a number of strategies, which include one, repurposing of resources to protect the lives and the livelihoods of the rural poor. Secondly, providing agricultural inputs subsidies such as seed and fertilizers. Thirdly, engaging financiers to restructure agricultural loans and ensuring food supplies to those communities to avoid malnutrition and the health effects it brings thereof. I thank you, colleagues. Over to you, Mr. Alvin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kuda, for that brilliant presentation that has shown us the analysis to guide policy and advocacy in repurposing and redirecting resources to support the most vulnerable communities in the face of COVID and who are small-scale farmers, and the very good job that you are doing in the region in sharing information and advice to local communities, as well as engaging the media. And coming up with a briefing paper on the impact of food security and nutrition, which could be a very good initiative, working with Glenn from the SADC NGO network and DSAF to see that we aggregate our policy positions and ensure that it is coherent with the immediate needs of small-scale farmers in the region, and we can assist in elevating that to the Africa Union. And a strong recommendation coming up in ensuring that government support the continuity of production of food, accessing inputs and outputs market, and highlighting the importance of trade. With that, I would like to invite Mr. Joe Mzinga to invite the next presenter, please.
Thanks a lot, Alvin, and thanks very much for a very nice summary. Now we have Madam Pofu. She's a farmer, but also she's a leader of an international organization, La Via Campesina. The slide will be on the screen. So over to you, Madam Pofu. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. I just want to greet all of you and also to appreciate the invitation which you have also done for me to join this webinar. I want to introduce myself because already most of you people you know very well, and I think we've been working together, but I'm proud also to be part of this team. Can we move ahead, please? Yeah, just a little introduction about the situation, which is really challenging the of farmers here in Zimbabwe. I think we know for the past few years we've been experiencing some droughts and also the cyclones. You know very well that sometimes with other crops which we may also take, it's now a very big challenge for most of the people to access enough food. So with the economic crisis, which is really worsened by this lockdown, it has just left some people and destroying the livelihoods of people if it continues without any interventions, the international or the external, to assist the people. Can we move ahead, please? The next slide. Hello. Yes. Just to give you a short background of what is happening in Zimbabwe right now, we know very well most of the people in Zimbabwe, they are informal traders who depend on hand to mouth, and their operations have been affected by the lockdown. And this lockdown was just announced because of the outbreak of COVID-19. All markets where the majority rely on buying vegetables and farm produce are closed, and this was at a very short notice. Can you hear me now? Hello? And it was just at a short notice.
Yes, we can hear you, madam.
That, oh, yes, it was during the weekend. No one had an idea of what was going to happen. So people were just left without any funds in their homes, no food, nothing. But what I can say is that there was
your network is not good.
This.
Hello?
I'm not hearing anything.
Hello, Madam Bofu. I think we lost her. So I would recommend that we move to the second speaker, if that's okay. Maybe when she comes back, she can summarize. Justin?
The next speaker is Madam Beatrice Makwenda from OXFAM, Malawi.
Yes, you have the presentation.
Yes, it's displaying now.
Yes, Madam Makwenda.
Madam, you're welcome.
Can you unmute your microphone, Madam Makwenda?
Good. Yes, I have I have unmuted. Hi.
So you have 3 minutes.
I guess we are
Your
now
slide
all...
is coming.
Okay, no problem. I think we are now all in the afternoon, so it's safe to say good afternoon. And I think, well, the slides, I'll not take much time, and we'll not spend time talking about the introductory issues around agriculture or COVID. I think those ones are well known, but suffice to say that for Malawi now, we're still at 17 cases, but those are just based on the limitations on the testing. So these are from the testing pool that has happened, and those are just the confirmed cases. In terms of the challenges, I think what this has brought on, unfortunately, this coincided with marketing season. It coincided with the marketing season, so there was quite a bit of a rush to say with what's happening within the country, but also many around us. How are farmers going to access markets? And this is both input as well as output markets. So the key challenges were, of course, one, in terms of the disruptions in the marketing arrangements, because with the preventive measures that have come, it changed the way farmers would come together at a market center and at least maybe offer their produces. So it needed a reorganization in terms of the markets, but also in terms of cash payments, now looking more into maybe mobile solutions, and also the transport cost, because measures also were for public transport that maybe they would only take reduced capacities in view of the measures that have been put in place. In that case, then to reciprocate that, the transport sector, especially the private bus operators, increased the costs, which led to increased cost of transport. So even though fuel, there were reduced prices in terms of gas, but in terms of, because of the reduced capacities, then it's still, there's an issue of increased transportation costs. But also being a farm organization and in terms of delivering extension services at this particular time, especially now where we were intensifying around grading, proper grading, so that they can get at least premium prices for the market with well-graded commodities, but also provision of bags and sacks and other market supporting equipment. It has presented a lot of challenges there as well, in terms of in what manner and how we can deliver such extension services to the farmers at this particular time. And the other was related to really the access to basic services within the communities, but also as farming communities in terms of education as a health. Schools are closed, and there's a lot of children and youth now that are just staying at home without finding maybe basic needs on how they can continue to access those. But also the health facilities are limiting the number of even outpatients, and if you are at least maybe not with these serious cases, you're being discharged. So that is putting a social toll even on households in terms of caring for maybe minor health-related issues, so that there's drive to decongest the healthy facilities. In terms of there's an issue for, of course, in terms of funding allocation, that relates to the initial programming has somewhat changed as well. So now you have to, in terms of providing sanitation equipment and sanitation facilities to the farming community. So that change results in changes in resource reallocation and things, but also in general, the increased cost of living and the cost of doing business in general. So those are some of the key challenges. Next slide. In terms of opportunities, of course, now we've been talking quite a lot in terms of how best we can harness ICT, especially now we increasing delivery of the services through mobile phones, in terms of sending out the agriculture advisory messages to them, but also even in terms of accessing education is through the use of ICT that's there. But also there's increased demand of food. In this case, of course, it's marketing opportunities for the farmers. Now also it's either we do it together or we all sync. So the need for enhanced collaboration between sectors, that there's the need for us to work more closely together in health, agriculture, trade, and even water is much more now than working in silos, which would just worsen the current challenges. But also now it's when we are really rethinking on the food and seed sovereignty aspects, but also to strengthen the seed systems, but also food supply chains, especially within the local communities where these ones need to be strengthened in terms of storage facilities. So there's now more looking at within the short term, but also in the long term, how really best can these be strengthened. And the opportunities, of course, it's also re-strategizing on the investment and support for private sector participation. In this case, small scale farmers that are involved in agribusinesses, but also encouraging the agro-processing at that local level, where instead of relying on imported food items. But also the opportunities is that, of course, it's really working on how best farmers can continue to access markets, but also now we see a more coherent approach in terms of private markets provision as well as government procurement that's really now targeting small scale farmers in this case, so that at least when the government intervenes in the markets, then they're able to defend the minimum farm gate prices with the provision of such procurement mechanisms around. In terms of maybe concluding this one is really to look at in terms of things that we can recommend and advocate for, is that there is these challenges, of course, are bringing a social toll on the farming households. So if the safety nets that are being provided, we need to look at targeting so that they are cushioned from these shocks. The different market arrangements that are being put in place, we should make sure that they work, especially for small scale farmers and women. The food supply chains, but are also responsive to both the rural and urban, because most of the majority of these producers are also the consumers of these commodities. So in terms of basic services and markets for other household requirements, those ones still need to be provided for, so that within the local communities, they're still able to access this. And then in terms of the targeting is they now coming up, government, private sector, even in the NGO sector, coming up with different support packages to sustain livelihoods. So our key interest there is to make sure that the right people are targeted with the right interventions, especially for small scale farmers, as well as women and youth. So I think in the 2-3 minutes, that's what I would say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Beatrice. She was speaking from Malawi, and she's a senior program officer with the National Smallholder Farmer Organization in Malawi, in short, NASFAM. Thank you very much for your presentation. Now, Arvin, are you there? Now let's move to the next presenter. Told the presentation is still being loaded. That's correct, Mr. Justin?
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yes, now can we cross to the next presenter by Madam Piri on the response of the people with money, the philanthropists. Madam Piri, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, good, nice to see you. Justin, can we move with the presentation on philanthropists, and then we can move to Dr. Bethry on gender later on. Arvin, I think you can summarize all together the two presentations. Over to you, Madam Piri.
Okay, thank you so much. And it's really a pleasure to be part of this very important discussion. As Southern Africa Trust, we continue to acknowledge the work that SAF has been doing in the region, and we are very grateful to be partnering with you at various levels. So quickly, just going to my presentation, I think we've heard from the discussions, the tangible effects that the pandemic has had on the agriculture sector. And I think it really calls for all of us to really find opportunities of how we can work together and have a joint response to actually stop the spread as well as mitigate the impact on the livelihoods of citizens. And I think it's important as we discuss as farmers organizations, as stakeholders that are working in this space, to acknowledge some of the challenges that we are facing and what support we actually need. Firstly, we know that this pandemic has caused some shifts in terms of funding priorities. I think we've heard from the example shared from NASFAM in Malawi, where that the funding priorities have changed and everybody's trying to respond to the COVID-19 and what can be done. Our ways of working are changing, but how as civil society organizations, how well prepared are we, and whether we have the technologies? We've already been discussing through this meeting where lines are cutting off, and do we have all the technologies that would help us to really continue to engage and do our work? There's been obviously a lot of delayed implementation, and we've really talked about the kind of information that is being disseminated around the COVID-19. I think I should also just raise here that when you look at the small scale farmer, I think there's been so much focus on the production side of small scale farmers and what they have to produce and the challenges, but really not on the well-being of the small scale farmer themselves. There are aspects around their weak resilience, their access to nutrition, limited access to services. I think that has been shared in other presentations. How do we ensure that there are resources that are targeting towards the well-being of the small scale farmer? Quickly going to the opportunities, I think one of the key challenges is around access to latest information and data that would help us to respond better to the COVID-19. I think such a platform like this one has already given us a lot of information that we can use in being responsive towards the farmers. So from the Southern Africa Trust, we have an initiative that is going on and which is to be launched soon, is a Southern Africa COVID response platform, where we are going to collect all the information across the various thematic areas that are key as economic drivers within the region. So agriculture, migration, trade, and you have all the resources in one space. And we'll obviously be coming back to key stakeholders that are part of this call to say what resources, what have you produced, and how do we put it in one place. But also that it's a platform where civil society organizations, policymakers can come and access information in terms of what are the opportunities that are there within the region for partnership, for collaboration. Secondly, how do we then pool our resources together? Looking within our communities, starting from the farming communities, how do we give in kind with what skills we have? So maybe farmers are not being involved in the production side, but they have other expertise, and how do you ensure you are harnessing these skills to better respond and mitigate the impact on the livelihoods of citizens? The knowledge and expertise amongst ourselves, the coordination between civil society and community foundations, and using such platforms as these webinars to coordinate with various donors in terms of what resources do you have and how do we work together to help the farming community, and using the media platform. Quickly looking at some of the opportunities that I wanted to share, I wanted to share that there are initiatives at the Africa level. The African Development Bank is in the process of setting up a civil society trust fund that is going to respond to the challenges with regards to the pandemic. So it's something that we can all look out to and see once this fund is set up. They're in the process of planning towards this to get it launched. And we can then harness opportunities to say what resources are going to be directed towards the agriculture sector and small scale farmers. There's already a COVID-19 response facility that is already launched, which has got $10 billion, but this is access to the members of the African Development Bank, but we can engage at a national level to really look at the opportunities. Quickly, another initiative from the Islamic Development Bank and African Development Bank, they're also trying to set up a civil society funding initiative. that is also going to be directed towards responding to the COVID-19. So it's really trying to find opportunities to engage in this space. At the SADC level, I think SADC Single already shared briefly about the regional response, but I think in addition, there's a regional resource mobilization initiative that is being launched. I think they're still thinking of how that is going to work. I think it's important for us to engage through those structures to say what resources are going to be allocated to civil society, to the key stakeholder sectors like the agriculture sector. And then in terms of the Regional Civil Society Response Fund, from the Southern Africa Trust, we've really been advocating towards setting up this Regional Civil Society Response Fund in relation to in working around the pandemic. The trust has been, over the years, been supporting civil society organization, and would like to continue to use our systems to be able to reach civil society organizations and be able to, because we know the different organizations within the region, and how do we best support them? One of them being in the agriculture sector, and how do we continue to support small-scale farmers? So we've really been advocating that the region really set up this regional civil society response fund that could assist all the other critical citizens groups. And finally, there are national initiatives that are going on. I would quickly talk about the South African experience, that they've set up this solidarity fund, which civil society organizations are tapping on to support communities. And also there's an initiative for small-scale farmers to support small-scale farmers for about 1.2 billion, whether your annual turnover is from 50,000 to 1 million rands, you'll be able to access some resources to help you through this challenging time. Other philanthropists, individual philanthropists, have also allocated different resources. I've provided that link. Participants can check that link to be able to see which philanthropists have put in resources towards addressing the COVID-19, and maybe look at opportunities of engaging these philanthropists. Quickly, I think I'll just end here and be able to share more information either offline or through the question and answer session.
Thank you very much, Krista. And just for your information on the chat, I saw a question from John C. I couldn't be able to pronounce the second name. He was asking what are the measures that we are putting in place as far as the promotion of agroecology and food security in the continent. But as the first speaker, I think the second or third speaker, Honorable Matthias Kasamba from the EAC, he spoke about the angles that we can use as far as pushing for much more food sovereignty in the continent. We have the angle of imports that he spoke about, and we have the angle of input. I think we have a lot of external input pushed in the continent and the region through the input support system. But also the biggest one is about changing the mindset as far as sustainable agroecological nutritious agriculture is in the continent. So thank you very much, Madam Piri, and regarding all those initiatives. And I propose that Mr. Alvin, that we proceed with the last speaker, Dr. Nyamambi, to hear about the gender perspective, and then you can summarize and then we open up.
Much obliged, Chair.
That's okay. We are not doing quite well. We have about 1 hour and about 10 minutes. So I think we need to move quickly. If that is okay. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks once again, ISAF, for inviting Trust Africa to be part and parcel of the journey that we are taking through what is an unprecedented time with COVID-19 in Africa, in East Africa, in Southern Africa. I saw a few places where my organization was not correct. I just want to introduce that I'm from Trust Africa, which is a Pan-African foundation, which is headquartered in Senegal. I am based in Zimbabwe and have a huge interest in what is happening in Southern Africa, particularly because we work in the countries in Southern Africa as well as in East Africa on agriculture, governance, and equitable development. And so just to highlight just a few things that we've been doing in the recent past to also support the initiatives and the solidarity actions within communities around COVID responses. We have been supporting social solidarity actions in communities through a solidarity fund that we have set up a few weeks ago. This fund will pool resources from civil society organizations and communities across the world to support the solidarity actions across Africa. And we are also looking at what will be the new normal, especially for civil society organizations as we go forward and try to figure out what does the new normal really look like. We need to start to reimagine what a post-COVID-19 world will look like for farmers, for food security, especially now with a looming international food crisis. And so I'd also like to invite you to join a webinar that we have tomorrow on the 22nd of April, which will be looking specifically at that. How can civil society organizations respond, as well as look at the future post-COVID-19. We're also working on highlighting the rights violations, especially for vulnerable communities, and looking at how we can also advocate with other organizations for better support for these communities. We all know that COVID-19 is affecting food producers, their markets, and food supply. And this is of high concern, I think, as our colleague from SADC, CNGO, noted, but we don't know what it will really look like in the future. And those that will be most affected are the ones that really are the primary food crop producers, and that is your women. I won't belabor the points because I think a number of the colleagues have already spoken about through the gender lens about what is happening with food security and food sovereignty, as well as food supply. But I think just to highlight a few points is that the implications, particularly on women who are the ones who are really anchoring the food production system, food supply system, particularly in Africa. We will note that there's a higher burden for care work and risk that involves women, especially because they are the ones who not only will have to ensure production continues, but they also have the responsibility to look after loved ones at home, may ensure that there's availability of food and care for the sick. There's a loss of market and daily wage earnings, particularly for women who are traders. We've heard already that beyond just the production aspect, there's a lot of women that are involved in cross-border trade, looking at it from the regional aspect, but also trade moving from rural to urban markets and within the market system itself. And with the closure of most of those markets, informal markets, we are going to see that many of the, especially women traders, are going to be disadvantaged. Another main issue that I want to highlight that hasn't been spoken much about is the gender-based violence. Already we have heard the statistics around an increase in gender-based violence. There's a crackdown on informal small-scale farmers and sellers and traders, but more so for women who are always at a disadvantage in that sense, and increased tensions and violence in the homes. But I want to then focus on what are the main opportunities that this crisis presents, not only for women as farmers, women as traders, for them to be front and center of providing that response in a way that ensures their power is noted. Please go to the next slide. I think it's important, and I think somebody else mentioned it, that we do prioritize the interventions that are looking at securing the future of our food supply, the markets, and where our food comes from. And this is particularly an opportunity to strengthen local food systems, local production, and to ensure that whatever governments are putting in terms of investment will ensure that there is that local production. As the trade routes are being closed more and more now, and there isn't much that is coming in through imports and so on, there's going to be a need for import substitution, and there's going to be a need to empower those that are producing for us and who are trading internally to supply the food that is needed, and to also use it as an opportunity to boost their incomes. It's important, I think, to note that as the food supply system is important, that we provide the protective equipment and materials and the interventions that protect the rights of women, particularly also in ensuring that they are organizing themselves in a way that they can lobby and to advocate for their spaces in the market. I will leave it there. As I said, many of the issues have been talked about, and we continue to work with the various organizations, those that are here as well as across the continent of Africa, to see how best we as civil society organizations can respond and to be in solidarity with others as we continue to fight COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor, and thank you again, everyone from the panelists. I think we are done with the list, the long list of panelists. Now, before we move to the question and answer session, and then I'll invite later on Mr. Alvin to summarize and put a way forward, I would like to invite yes, I would like to invite Adem, if there are questions from the chat, and then we hear from the response from the panelists, and then we can open it up for 5 minutes. So, Mr. Andrew Adem, over to you.
Hello, good afternoon. So far, we have questions coming in. One that you highlighted, Mr. Muzinga, was the one about where someone is asking, how do we promote agroecology and food sovereignty in this kind of situation? We have also seen reports where studies have justified that this is the time when agroecology should be promoted more, because even the response to COVID, we are talking about health, we are talking about nutrition. So I think Mama Mpofu, I don't know whether you have a response to this question. How we can use this opportunity to make sure we bring back agroecology, we transition agroecology to agroecology. Madam Mpofu.
Okay, just maybe to try to respond to that question. There's no other option regarding of promoting agroecology, because right now with the healthy systems which have been affected by these industrial farming systems, I think it's a very big opportunity for us now. But what is needed is create awareness to all the farmers in the region, East and Southern Africa, to see the importance of agroecology, because we already have some good case studies on how agroecology can be very useful to adapt to climate crisis. And right now we are talking of COVID-19, which is another pandemic which needs healthy food. So how do we really want to produce this healthy food agroecologically? So I think there are so many institutions which can be useful to how to train people to grow agroecologically. In Uganda, we have SAF Uganda, it's practicing agroecology. In Zimbabwe, we have ZIMSOF. We have an agroecology school. In Mozambique, we also have an agroecology school. I think this can be also these sites which can be very useful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Maimpofu. Andrew, do you have any follow-up question? I can see Maria Goss would like to participate in the webinar tomorrow. I think that's good. It's better to share. Doctor, it's better to share the link if we can share on the chat, the question and answer chat. But also, this is to John. Indeed, there has to be some changes in some systems, policies, and support system for vulnerable communities. Thank you very much. Adam, do you have any other question that is coming from the participants before we invite Ivy?
I think we have I'll ask Justin to give some. I see Karim. I think the person wants to ask a question. I don't know whether Justin can activate the person's audio.
Justin, are you there?
Yes, yes. Who is that?
Karim.
Karim.
Okay. Karim, you're welcome.
Karim, over to you.
Okay, as we are waiting for that person to activate the mic, maybe we could
There is another question from Karim.
Joe.
Okay, Karim is here. Karim is here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Karim from Solidarity in Africa. Really, thank you very much for initiating this webinar, and also thank you for the presentations by the entire panel of experts. I want to just make a few general observations on what had been presented, and which I think is also critical for us to keep in the current COVID-19 debates. So, firstly, I think it's the fact that COVID-19 caught the whole region and the continent, like elsewhere, with our pants down, which emphasizes our lack of preparedness in a time of crisis. It is not that we do not know the primary causes of death in Africa remains communicable infections and diseases. You know, we have AIDS, we have Ebola, malaria, maybe a little bit under control, cholera, and now increasingly also climatic shocks. So this, you know, sadly, it's a very simple fact, but this simple fact should have altered our behavior already. So at this point, I think it's really unacceptable as it leaves a lot of the citizens uncertain, scared, and insecure. So we really urgently need a continental response for this continental crisis. So then I want to just also raise another point. The coronavirus really just accentuates the need for us to have more reliable, accurate, and concrete data and information about smallholder farmers in the region, so that governments can take coordinated, integrated, and informed decisions on relief support for small-scale farmers, and also to combat food insecurity. But I think, you know, most governments took a reactive approach. So secondly or thirdly, if we do not have, if we do not have it yet, we really need pragmatic policies and strategies, mobilizing and allocated adequate resources, and enhancing institutional capabilities and capacities for accelerated implementation of sustainable food and agricultural systems. And this should be in a collaborative, integrated and coordinated manner among all governance. For instance, all countries are reactive instead of being strategic at this point. I think it had been raised also in the different presentations. Just from our side, I want to make an example. For instance, South Africa, there's many initiatives, which is basically citizen initiatives in response to COVID-19, not public. I mean, we've seen, the government stepping up now. Our Minister of Agriculture announced funding allocation to mitigate food security in the country through something like a 1.2 billion rand cash injection for small-scale farmers. But this comes with a list of eligibility criteria. Most of the farmers live from hand to mouth. This was also mentioned. Some of them are illiterate. I think quite a large portion of small-scale farmers, which is also often subsistent farmers. So for me, I question whether the relief actually targets the right people, such as women farmers, for instance. From a regional continental view, I think we need to look at what is SADC and COMESA economic strategies, because we are interdependent on trade relations in the region, but also continentally. And then I think lastly, what we need is not superficial, but meaningful, responsive treaties. And with that, tangible mechanisms to hold those states who sign these treaties accountable. In addition, it also counts for civil society. Our own preparedness on the kind of shocks that we have experienced should really it should have built our muscle to flex the muscle with the power of voices to influence governments about what we can do to blunt the vulnerability of small-scale farmers and those families.
Thank you very much.
Security.
Thank you very much.
So, yeah, so I just wanted to raise some of these points and also agree with that we need our both and
Karen,
normal.
Karen,
yes.
Unfortunately we are running out of time,
okay.
But we have taken the point as far as how is the response, is it targeting the right people? We don't want superficial response, and they will need concrete moving forward continental response. Before we wind up, I think some of the questions and the summary of the presentation, we will invite Mr. Alvin to respond quickly, because we are really running out of time and this is the lunch time. What I can say, I can see on the webinar chat is some from Elizabeth Mpofu, a farmer from Zimbabwe. She's talking about the worry about the lack of relevant information to the rural poor, who are the majority living in rural areas. Right now, the focus mostly on urban areas, and all the supports are targeting people in the city. I think that is a very serious concern, alluded also by Dr. Beturi, as far as the rural women farmers in the rural setup. I think according to the FAO, in the short term, people in the rural areas will be resilience, but moving forward, there'll be hard hit, particularly due to poor demand of and poor movement of foods in those areas, from those areas. So let me invite, in 3 minutes, Mr. Alvin to conclude and then give us a way forward. I think, Alvin, we have heard a lot of that we need to have a continental response. So over to you, 3 minutes, if you can.
Yeah, thank you so much, George. Thank you so much, Beatrice, Christine, and Dr. Bethule, for the stories that are coming out from Malawi, Zimbabwe, and from the philanthropic world on the challenges that are facing small-scale farmers, issues to do with access to markets, both in terms of inputs and outputs, and how this has reconfigured the marketing arrangements, and there is disruption of deployment of extension services, as well as the logistical challenges in transport, both in countries and within the regions, and opportunities that have come up and exist in harnessing ICT. And we've seen Elizabeth has just faced the same challenge, and Christine emphasized on that, and the increased demand for food and marketing opportunities, which is for small-scale farmers. But how do we ensure that we safeguard this? and also the call for enhanced collaboration between the sectors of health, agriculture, trade, and water, and rethinking our food systems at both local level and seed sovereignty aspects, and ensuring that we safeguard our supply chains. A lot of issues have come up on gender, and Dr. Bethule highlighted the burden of care work on women, and emphasized the importance of ensuring that family is protected, women are protected, and ensuring that the loss of markets and the daily wages that rural women farmers who depend on the daily activities are protected, and that they're able to access safety nets, but also ensure that they are able to access protective equipment and materials, and ensure that we also protect them from gender-based violence, which we know that it has tripled with this pandemic. From South African Trust, we've had the importance of collaboration, solidarity, and joint response on the impact of livelihoods, and looking at the challenges, especially now that funding has shifted, the ways of working have also been affected, and thereby posing challenges like implementation of activities and misinformation, which in my view presents an opportunity for us to work together as civil society organizations, aggregate our efforts, and complement our work in order to come up with a joint civil society organization response to what has been established at regional and continental level by the Africa Union, and primarily what Christabel highlighted on the Africa Development Bank facility in helping the recovery of the continent. Ladies and gentlemen, we must not also forget about the climate crisis and the exponentially growing corona crisis, which is intensifying massively and affecting our people, and which also poses an existential threat to the poor and the vulnerable people, small-scale farmers, differently in different contexts. And therefore, we must also give it priority to reduce the vulnerability of those people that are being affected by these both crises, and support them to build up their resilience to the impacts of both climate and the coronavirus, and to help them to deal with these unavoidable consequences. Therefore, Joe, I would beg and pray that civil society organizations come together, and we can support in information sharing, awareness creation, work with others to do a continental analysis, and put together a continental webinar with other policy entities from the regional economic communities to the Africa Development Bank and to the Africa Union, so that we can together submit a continental-wide recommendation from civil society organizations on how the continent should respond going forward. Over to you, Joe.
Very much, Arvin, and thank you very much, everyone who participated in this webinar. I would like to recognize all participants from Eastern and Southern Africa, or beyond this region, and also in Europe. I would like to recognize also the support that we are getting from Bread for the World. Thank you very much. Moving forward, we have our partners both in Eastern Africa, targeting the EAC and also targeting the SADC. We are working very closely with Trust Africa, Uganda Food Alliance, but also all the networks of ISAF and OXFAM, but also not forgetting Greenpeace Africa, which I can see also in this webinar. And also I acknowledge the participation of Action Aid. We are working very closely with the SADC, and we're working very closely with the East African community. So as Alvin said clearly, that we are moving forward to see that we make sure that this agenda does not just end up with the webinar, but concrete measures are being taken at the regional level and all throughout the countries in Eastern and Southern Africa. I thank you everyone for participation, and we are going to consolidate all this and put in the reports. And I'm quite sure that there was a recording, and you can get the this session all through the YouTube. I'm not so sure if Mr. Justin, I'm right on that. So thank you very much.
There's a link that is posted, and we have been live on YouTube.
Okay,
yeah,
thank
so
you very
if
much.
you would like to review and go back to the discussions. Okay.
Good, thank you very much, and thank you for your patience, and bon appetit. Thank you again.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks so
Bye-bye.
much.
Oh, bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, Joe.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Glenn. Oh,
Bye.
thank you very much.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, bye.